In his new book, American Mojo, Lost and Found, Peter Kiernan takes us through a history of the American middle class and discusses what we can do today to save it. Peter, thank you for being here.
I'm delighted.
First, just very simply, what is the middle class? What does that mean exactly? How do you define it?
Well, it's changed a great deal since World War II, when we tended to think of it as a block of mostly white men and women who earned a certain amount of money. Today, it's a very different construct. Think of it like an atom, with a core group in the center, and then electrons, people spinning out and in to the middle class all the time. And that velocity, that volatility is what's turned it into a bit of a mapmaker's nightmare.
When you talk about that core in the middle class, what is that defined as? Is it a certain income bracket or a certain amount of assets or certain markers like a house and a kid? Or?
There are lots of different ways that people have tried to approach it, the census and other economists. I think the most useful is to look at the aspirations. What do people who want to be in the middle class aspire for? What do they hope for?
What do they? What does that mean to people?
And chief among those is housing and a car and a good health care program and great education for themselves and for their kids, and frankly, the confidence that their children will be better off than they are.
Is the middle class disappearing? What's the evidence of that? Because it's rhetoric that we've often heard over
It's changing,
the years.
and it is very true that those relevant examples of middle class aspiration have been subject to very spiky inflation. Now, overall inflation has been moderate, but relevant inflation has been incredibly high.
What's relevant inflation to you?
It's the rising costs of healthcare, of housing, of auto, of food, of the basic necessities to live a middle class life. But as those costs have spiked since 1970, real wages have flatlined. And that's put the middle class in a huge bind.
Let's talk about how the middle class is used in politics, because we've often heard it be part of a candidate's political platform when they're talking about helping the middle class or speaking to the middle class, appealing to the middle class. You say that's changed. You say you can't look at it as one voting faction. Why is that? And are you seeing this change? Candidates move away from this term.
It's a great question, because there are probably 20 people now who are lining up in one way or another to run for the presidency of the United States. And whether they're Democrat or Republican or independent and everywhere in between, they all seem to come to some sort of statement of support for the middle class or for everyday Americans or for another kind of euphemism that refers to this core group that is our majority. And what's frustrating is, while more and more of them are coming forward and saying, I'm going to be the candidate for the middle class, what they're not saying is anything very specific about what they intend to do for the middle class.
Is that because it's so diverse a group that you can't address it? And also, I read some reporting that candidates for 2016 for president are increasingly moving away from the term middle class and using phrases like everyday Americans or just some other term that isn't middle class.
It is true. It has become the euphemism that dares not speak its name. And the difficulty is that there's no easy way, there's no simple remedy to fix what's ailing the middle class. But when you have spiking inflation to be in the middle class and flat wages, you've got a gap. You've got a wage gap, you've got a skills gap, you have an opportunity gap. And what we need to get, and what I'm hoping everyone who reads my book will do, is press those people who are running for office to say, okay, wonderful that you're a champion of the middle class. What specifically does that mean? What are you going to do?
What would you do to save the middle class? What are a couple of key reforms you would think need to be made?
Well, I would say two right off the top of my head. First, I think we have to move heaven and earth to get great jobs in this country. We're creating jobs, but a lot of them are low-wage, entry-level jobs. And one of the great frustrations is there are 40 million people who are poor in this country, and that's rough. But just above that seam of the poverty line are another 45 million or 50 million who are one twist of bad luck away from being in the middle class. And there are, as a result, 40% of kids in our nation will live in a household that has food stamps sometime in their life. And so this leaving and entering, of the middle class is a dynamic that we have to address. And the action is along that seam, along that poverty seam. How do you get people who are close to it above the poverty line? And how do you prevent people who are right there hovering just a lost paycheck, just a lost job, just a cancer operation away from dipping down into the poverty line.
All right, and we do have to go, but I just want to clarify, when you're talking about spiking inflation, inflation has actually been running quite low. In fact, the Federal Reserve would maybe like more of it. So could you just specify what exactly you mean?
Sure, exactly. This is what I call in my book relevant inflation. You're right, absolutely correct that there's moderate inflation generally. But the things that it takes, if you want to go to school, if you want to go to college, if you want to buy a car, if you want to buy a house, if you want to get health care, one of the leading causes of bankruptcy is a cancer diagnosis. There are things that used to be very affordable by people in the middle class that are outside their reach right now.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Peter
Sure.
Kiernan, the book is out today, American Mojo, and let us know what you think in the comment section below. Thank you.